In August of this year, the first TCR cell therapy to be approved for use in the U.S. was green-lighted by the FDA for patients with resectable or metastatic synovial sarcoma who have previously received chemotherapy. It marked the first new treatment for those patients in more than a decade, so it was a win for those patients and a win for Adrian Rawcliffe, who's had a hand on the wheel at Adaptimmune, the therapy's developer and manufacturer, since he joined the company as CFO in 2015 and subsequently stepped into the CEO's office in 2019. I'm Matt Pillar. This is The Business of Biotech. And on today's episode, we're getting to know Adrian and why he's all in on cell therapies and how he's applying a solid track record in finance and business development to make good on the promises those cell therapies offer. Adrian, welcome to The Business of Biotech.
Delighted to be here, Matt.
I'm delighted to have you. And congratulations, by the way. It was just, so this, we're recording here in September for the benefit of our audience. This episode probably won't drop until sometime in October, late October, maybe. I'm not real sure just off the top of my head, but the approval just happened in August. So exciting news for Adaptimmune, and congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's fantastic news for us. Yeah, fantastic news for us, fantastic news for patients, fantastic news for the cell therapy field, all of those things. And we're excited. And as you might imagine, just absolutely focused on launching at the moment.
Yeah. I want to start out by getting some background on you. Like, I want to rewind and kind of discover what makes you tick, because, you know, as we often do, we do a little bit of snooping and stalking on our guests. And, you know, you're on paper, you're a finance guy through and through. You're a chartered accountant. You've got a PwC pedigree. You've served in roles including president at SR1 Capital. SR1's been on the show before. You were VP of finance at GSK. What sort of prompted this move into biotech leadership, and more specifically that of a cell therapy company? Tell me a little bit about that. How do you go from being a PwC accountant to someone who dives headfirst into the life sciences space?
I mean, I'd love to say that there's a nice linear path, but I tend to be quite distrustful of people who claim linear paths to their careers. My first love was science. I went to university to read chemistry. I decided quite early on that I didn't really like chemistry. I switched to read natural sciences, which is a more broad-based degree. I did a lot of molecular biology, biochemistry, biology in that, and then at the end of that, there's a choice. And you know, maybe I should have realised that I'm a generalist by nature. I'm not sure I did realise that at the time, but the choice was between, okay, specialization in a field of science. My third year thesis was on higher plant phosphatases, which is a really boring group of plant enzymes that are incredibly commercially interesting, but not particularly scientifically interesting. And I really didn't want to spend the next 4 years focusing on that. And you know, this was early 90s, and you know, there was a recession in the UK, and there weren't that many people who were hiring, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went and I joined PwC, or Cooper's and Lybrand at that point in time. And part of the reason was, well, it's another opportunity to get a broad-based education in something, to defer the decision about what to do for a while, probably. And it seemed like an attractive route to take. I don't think many people would classify me as a classic accountant. But interestingly, in the UK, it's slightly different to the US because in the UK, those firms will take people with any degree. You don't have to have decided at age 15 you wanted to be a CPA or an accountant. You could, like me, decide that that's something to do when you're 21 and having completed a degree in something else. So I did that for a few years, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's foundational, that lens and slant on how to analyze the finances of a business. But then I by strange serendipity came across an advertisement in a paper for a job that turned out it was at Glaxo Wellcome. And I decided this was a good fit for me, and I went. And I had no experience of the pharma industry at that point in time. You know, and I think not many 26-year-olds, as I was then, really do unless they've been very unfortunate. And so I joined into a finance group, but it was a deal finance group, and that's the other thing that's sort of interesting about my career at GSK. As though some of the roles are financially oriented, very few of them were sort of like classic finance roles until
Crunching numbers, right?
it wasn't really until I got to CFO of North America about a decade later that I actually had a sort of classical finance role. Most of the stuff in between was transactional. It was business development. It was running SR1, GSK's venture fund, and so those roles on the interface of science and business, which I think are incredibly interesting. They're sort of scattered around companies like GSK, but they're fascinating roles because they sort of urge you to apply the finance to the finance business side to the science, but they also require at least some understanding of how you drive value out of science, and that was sort of essential in the most of the roles that I had to that point, which were really transactional, leading up to running worldwide business development immediately before I shifted over to be CFO of North America.
Yeah.
So,
At SR1, did you work with Simeon George, or was he like was he after you?
yeah, no, I hired Simeon.
You hired Simeon, okay. Wow.
Simeon joined around the time that I did, and great little team, and that I'm really happy with the success story of SR1. 30 years at GSK, and then the sort of spin out and the subsequent success that they've enjoyed. It's a testament to the need for the opportunity for industry-focused venture capital to be effective over the long term.
Yeah, yeah. Simeon was my guest a couple episodes ago. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but you'll have to check that out.
Great
Fantastic interview, fantastic man. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about this sort of, I guess, rationalization of risk tolerance and financial responsibility. It kind of opens up that can of worms, right? You've got this long history and a proven history of being able to analyze deal making, the business transactions for a big company like GSK, lots of resources. Cell therapy comes along, and I don't want to fast forward. We can kind of go forward in reverse here as much as we want. So I don't want to fast forward too quick, but you joined Adaptimmune in 2015 as CFO, and you did that for a specific reason, as I understand it, because you were bullish on cell therapy. How does Adrian Rawcliffe get to that point where, I've been responsible with a lot of people's big money for quite some time, and now I have this opportunity to move into a field that at the time, 2015, like there's a high degree of risk making that move. I don't know, just what was going on. Give us a picture of what was going on in your brain at the time and how you rationalized that, the embrace of that risk.
Yeah. I think there were sort of three fairly distinct reasons why I joined Adaptimmune at that point. One was, just really simplistically, I was bored. I'd been CFO of the US business for 4 years, and it sounds strange to say it, and my managers and leaders at the time were like, "Well, it's a really important job," and I was like, "Yeah, but it's not actually that interesting." And it wasn't giving me the intellectual stimulation that I needed to be successful. And I didn't think I'm not a particularly good maintainer. I'm a good builder, but I'm not a good maintainer. And so that was one. And then the second piece was a strategic decision, a couple of strategic decisions that GSK made. And don't get me wrong, I think very highly of my time at GSK and of the company. And for reasons that I completely understand, they made two decisions. They got out of neurodegeneration research, and they got out of oncology. And the second one, they did a big transaction that involved them giving their oncology to Novartis. And it was a great transaction for GSK. I don't think it was a bad deal, but it did mean that they got out of those two spaces. And I was sitting there going, well, what do we care about in the Western Hemisphere, which is the place that actually pays for most of the pharmaceutical R&D to happen in one way or another? I think those are the two things that, if you ask anybody on the street, they would say, "What's your biggest fear, health fear?" They would say,
Yeah.
cancer or Alzheimer's or your brain going. Now they probably should say cardiovascular disease and obesity and all this other stuff, but those are two big fears. And so GSK getting out of them, I was just like, what are we doing? And I got to the point in my career where I was like, okay, I want to be doing something that is very significant contribution to human health. What do I know? Well, I've looked at 1,000 biotech companies. I've done diligence on hundreds of them over the time that I was running BD or bits of BD or SR1. And suddenly there's this field of cell therapy that's out there that's starting to get to prime time. And it strikes me that this is sort of similar to what happened with protein therapeutics 20 years previously. That this is a new modality of therapy. That this is a significantly different way of treating patients that would come with a whole set of opportunities and risks and challenges. But that if it worked, and that was still a fairly big if this worked, then you change the world. You don't just change an individual patient's life or an individual therapy. This isn't one drug. This is something where if this works, we transform how cancer is treated and our relationship as a species with cancer. We have the opportunity to do that. And I still believe cell therapy has that opportunity. And so looking at that, it was clear that a lot of the interest in that space at that time, but still the case, is in the hematological malignancies, in blood cancers. So the CAR T therapies were really big. And that's great. And those have completely transformed that space. But the solid tumor space, the cancers that everybody recognizes that don't have confusing acronyms, that are named after major organs, those things, it has struggled to be addressed with the CAR T, and yet here was this company, here was this thing, this way of approaching these with Adaptimmune that was applicable to these solid tumors. And again, if it works, it's huge. So when you think about risk, it's difficult to think about risk without thinking about the opportunity. And at that point in time, and I still believe this to be the case, the opportunity in solid tumors with cell therapy is so enormous and so fundamental that yes, there is a high risk that goes with it, but that is offset by orders of magnitude by the opportunity if we can get that right. In the same way that monoclonal antibodies were for biopharmaceuticals back in the day. I mean, I was at GSK from sort of 98 through to the early 2000s period when all the companies, large pharma companies, were thinking about, do I get into biopharm? If you'd told almost any company then that 7 of the top 10 selling pharmaceuticals will be biopharmaceuticals in 20 years' time, I don't think they'd have believed you. And the number one selling product in the entire world would be a biopharm, would be Humira. I don't think people would have recognized that at the time. And so I think that the opportunity in cell therapy is at least as significant as that in monoclonals or
That opportunity and sort of that analogy, it's intriguing because you said you don't think people would have believed it at the time that a biologic would be the biggest selling therapy in the world, and they wouldn't have believed it at the time. Well, you tell me why. Like, why wouldn't they have believed it? You tell me before I tell you what I think. You tell me why not.
I'm very interested in what you think. My perception is that we get stuck in paradigms, and the practitioners of that paradigm have a great deal of difficulty in understanding the succeeding paradigm. And the succeeding paradigm is rarely replacing the previous paradigm. It usually just adds to it in therapy.
Yeah.
So if you think about small molecules, all the practitioners of making small molecules were focused on the benefits of small molecule, and their entire organization was set up to realize those benefits. And then we've sort of convinced ourselves that those benefits trumped other things. So, for example, patients like pills, they don't like injections. Yeah? So you come along with an injection and patients, the less value given to, the interval between doses. A real understanding of small molecules and how they interact and the positive elements of those makes you less inclined to really believe the benefits of protein-protein interactions that you might get from biopharms. And so you downplay in your mindset of I'm a small molecule drug developer, you downplay all the things that make biopharms important. Critically, it's those things that make biopharms distinct that actually deliver the benefits and the risks of that new modality of therapy. So every time a new modality comes along, it has certain inherent features to it. In biopharm terms, it's sort of, it's almost always going to be injectable. Yes, people have talked about oral biopharmaceuticals, but the vast majority are going to be injectable. They're going to have a long time in situ. Their half-life is measured in, usually weeks or months, not in hours or days. They are capable of exquisitely tight binding to a target because that's how the protein has evolved in order to deliver that. And so there are a set of properties that then confer. Then, if you leverage those in development, you can confer clinical benefit to a patient from that. And those are going to be fundamentally different to the clinical benefit that you get from a small molecule because of the intrinsic nature of that modality. And so I think when people were turning up, you can imagine I've got a brand new biotech company full of protein engineers turning up to talk to a medicinal chemist about at a large pharmaceutical company about drug development and why couldn't I just drug that with a small molecule, and how much are you going to charge for that? And none of those questions are convincing for the people who live in the previous paradigm. So I think that's why.